Hi, I'm Simon. I'm in France, in the middle of France, and it's the middle of the afternoon. And the cat is still there. The cat is
Oh
still
yeah,
behind me,
cool.
and I'm going to pass on to my friend over here, who's going to say who he is a bit.
And I am Terry Elliott, and I live in the middle of the United States, on top of a bunch of caves here in Kentucky, and it's the greenest spring I can ever remember. It is just incredible right now. It's stunning. I mean, you really walk outside when it's sunny, and it's like, OMG, WTF, and then there's no words. So today, I'm lucky. It's overcast today, rainy and overcast, and just what we needed, more rain for more greenery. But it's wonderful. It's great.
Can you speak more about grass?
Yeah, yeah. Grass is something that you read, just like a book, uh, when you're a sheep farmer. And there are cold season grasses and there are warm season grasses. And there are grasses that handle um, drought well, and grasses that handle wet well. And there are grasses that are, in some farms, are weeds, but on our farm, they're actually the thing that sustains the sheep in the hottest parts of the month of the summer. You know, Kentucky is a semi-tropical rainforest in the summer, and in August it gets really hot. August and September it just gets really hot. Can get upwards of 100 to 115 degrees here in the summer. Not that often, but it's wildly variant. Like the end of next week, it'll be highs in the 70s and lows in the 50s. And sorry, this is Fahrenheit. The only country in the whole world who's not. not but back to grasses. There's one grass is called Johnson grass, and was originally imported or brought into the country as a feed because it was so, it could grow so prolifically. But it turns out it's a rhizomatic plant that is an incredible weed if you have too much of it. So Johnson grass for us is great because it comes on in a time of the year where all the other grasses kind of fade off and go dormant. And so grasses are, I don't know. It's fascinating for me, and I can just go off
Do you
on
have
a little.
do you have grass stories
Mm.
from one year to the next, or one day to the next?
Oh yeah. When the sheep tell an interesting story with grass. Um, this is not always the case, but almost always when you move sheep from one field to another, one paddock to another, whatever you want to call them, um, they will they go heads down, right? They're totally focused, and that's the story of a sheep is that when they have fresh grass, they're totally focused on the grass, and they're not only focused on the grass, they're focused on the best grass. So you get 20, 30 sheep in a field, they'll start cruising. They'll start cruising around the field, eating the best grass. And then they'll they'll sit down and they'll ruminate. I think that could be part of a story. When you ruminate, like a sheep or a cow or a goat, they're kind of sitting there and they're thinking about their food in their bellies, and they're digesting it, and then of course out comes the stuff at the end. They turn into meat and into poop. And of course, that's how we've been on this farm for about 30 years. And we've slowly but surely turned this farm into a very productive, perhaps not the most productive, but there are a lot of compromises we make with nature, or willingly make with nature. There's another story there is that, you live in a system that essentially defies understanding. in any conventional sense, rational sense. I mean, the whole idea behind agriscience and agribusiness is so opposite to agriculture that it just doesn't make any sense to me, because I can go out every day on this farm and I can find something that is a mystery. I just have no understanding. And grass is one of the greatest mysteries of all, is that it grows at different rates. It's subject to so much pressure from other things, from temperature, and of course the sheep grazing on it. So we have to be very careful. We have to pay really close attention to the grass's story, because it does tell a story. It starts out, it's baby grass, and you don't want to put sheep on that because they'll kill it. And then you've got teenage grass. This is really what you want growing all the time, but that's impossible. Nature will not grow teenage grass all the time, but it's the best because it has the most protein and the most, good stuff in it. And then you've got senescent, senile grass. You don't want that at all, because that's making seed, but you want some of it, right? Because you want something to be, you want a little bit of everything in the field, and you think you might be able to manage for that, but you can't. You kind of guess, and by gosh, and it's luck. But every field tells a story. So we've got one big field and one small field, and lots of little fields where we kind of move the animals around. And then the big field, we're always worried. Is it going to come back? Is it going to come back? Because we have no faith in nature. But nature has a way. And if nature doesn't want to produce grass, then you have to get rid of sheep. It's just that is the simple part of the equation, is that nature will make you decide things that you don't want to decide, but too bad. So there's all kinds of stories going on. You walk out into a field and you say, well, look at that. There's burr clover in there. And you're thinking to yourself, that's a lot of burr clover. How'd that get in there? Or you'll look at the something like an herb, like I can't remember the name of it. It's a big white blonde yarrow. We've got a lot of white yarrow in our field. And I've been watching these patches grow and subside and grow and subside over the years. I don't see any sense to it at all. This year, it's the biggest crop of yarrow we've ever had. And it's beautiful. And the sheep like parts of it, and they don't like other parts of it. And they clip off the flower heads, and I think that helps them grow, but I don't know. So every day is something new in the field. And of course the bugs, the bugs working with the manure. It's sometimes I go in the field and I say, I see there's a lot of poop in the field, and I yell at the dung beetle. I say, get to work. Because I had a friend of mine who was a beekeeper, a big beekeeper, and he kept bees on our property for about 10 years. And he had about 15 hives. That's a lot of bees. And every once in a while, down by the bees, they're down by our barn, our old broken down barn, buckets of water for the sheep. But the bees would get in on there, and he'd go over there and he'd look at the water, and there'd be a bunch of dead bees in there. He'd get mad at the bees. He'd say, you're not supposed to be drinking that water. You're supposed to be going down to the creek and drinking that water. He'd yell at him. I mean, he had a very one-to-one relationship with his hives. Very odd character, but a interesting guy. He had bees all over this part of the country, up in Illinois, Wisconsin, down in Florida. Any place that needed bees, he'd move them around. He was an interesting guy. So I have my conversations with the dung beetles. Appropriate, I think. So yeah, you got me going storifying now. It's like a What's
poetry.
That?
Poetry.
Yes. Oh yes, yeah, it is poetry. It's somebody was talking I was reading a post this morning, and they were talking about decomplexification. And of course, Latinate words like that kind of rub me the wrong way. I use them all the time, but when somebody else is using them, God. And so, I was thinking about that guy, James Scott, talking about, things that are legible and things that are illegible. Nature is illegible, and every attempt to make it legible is just kind of a disappointment. We end up killing it, or killing parts of it when we do that. That's what's happened in the heart of the United States, is that places that used to have 10, 15, 20 feet of topsoil, like in the prairies in Iowa, now are the water, it just gets washed away because they haven't worked with nature. The prairie holds the soil if you've got prairie, but it limits you. You can't plant corn, soybeans, and whatever you want for the agribusiness. So you lose the soil, and eventually you lose enough soil where it can't make anything. So that's the story. Here I have a little bit of hubris about what we've done here in 30 years, thinking that maybe we've made this little part of the world, a little more fertile, a little more habitable. And I think we have, but then I say, yeah, so what? When I die, somebody's going to come along and just do whatever they want with it. Because my kids are not really interested in farming. Of course, that's what always happens, right? My son said, don't get me near a sheep the rest of my life if I can help it. So lots of stories. Yeah, pretty cool.
How do you feel about that lack of rootedness of your kids? Because from what you're saying, you're rooted.
I don't have any problem with it at all, with their choices, because there's lots of other things I've given to them that they can take with them. Right. All of our kids were unschooled, and that's one. I think that's much more of a legacy for them than farming. Although they learned things like one of the things we did. We have this weed that's called Carolina nettle, and in the Carolinas they call it Tennessee nettle. So it's like the Germans and the French. There's a weed the French call German weed, and there's a weed that the Germans call French weed. It's just the nature of that beast. And so we would give them a nickel for every one of these weeds they would dig up out of the ground. So if they ever wanted some money, we didn't give them allowances. We just say, okay, do this and you get this. And to their credit, they would do it for a while. It's a hard job, and they'd earn money, and then they wouldn't want to go back and they wouldn't want to do it again. I mean, they're smart, and that was kind of an unintended consequence there. But they've always worked hard and been willing to work to get what they can, and they're curious. They're people who are curious about the world, and you don't get me talking about those stories because that to me is the greatest legacy. The DNA legacy is much more profound than the land legacy that I have here. I mean, I really love this place here, but their legacy is one of helping others. And my middle daughter Lark is a nurse, and she's good at it, and being smart and like good engineers like my son is he's not an engineer, but he's a tech person, and is as sharp as the day is long about stuff like that. And my youngest is just the most emotional critter on the face of the planet, and she reads people better than a book, and it's kind of her it's her I don't know, it's not always a good thing, right, to be able to read people well. People don't like that. They don't like it at all. So I don't think I answered your question, but I would like for them to come back. If I were like a prepper or one of these apocalyptic dudes, I'd say I'm keeping this farm for when the shit hits the fan and the apocalypse comes. And I always laugh when I think about that. If the apocalypse comes, I'm the first one who's going to die. People will come down my road, and I'll say, "Come on back here," and then one of them will be a psychopath, and they'll kill us all. Right? The dark view of that. So I'm not. I don't think many of us will survive. I think the worst of us will survive the apocalypse. I don't know how.
I have a question. With your fencing
Mm-hmm.
and your observation over the years of your sheep. You used the word productive,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I'm thinking about. There's a story. I don't know if you probably know this. The stories of Pagnol, Marcel Pagnol. There's a
Uh,
film which was made of Jean Le Florette.
is this the
Do you
man
know
who
this?
planted trees and grew happiness?
No, this is a story of south of France, and there is a guy who comes in with his agricultural science, and the people around him find this very amusing because he has all this knowledge which he has taken from books,
Hmm.
and he has these big ideas about being productive.
Yeah.
And then after I think the first season, he's hit by drought, and basically the whole his whole project is wiped out. So it's a story really of this unsustainability
Yeah.
of a particular way of working, viewed from the point of view of, well, it's following his story, but also you have the whole. No, I'm trying to. There's a French word that keeps coming to my head. Um, the local peasantry respond to that. Firstly, with amusement, and then as a threat.
A threat to local knowledge. Right. That's always the case between inside and outside. Is local knowledge versus universal knowledge, and how I think we've abandoned local knowledge pretty much um, in where I live. I've seen it happen here. I've seen it happen with, although I despise tobacco as a crop, that was part of the local knowledge. It was part of the things that made life here sustainable. You know, you could buy a farm that had a tobacco allotment on it. You could essentially pay for the farm with the tobacco allotment. So there's a lot of small farmers here, and that became unsustainable after they did away with the tobacco quota program here, which it killed tobacco, and it killed all the small farms that were dependent upon it, because then only large farms were doing it, and only large farms could afford to bring in workers to cut and house the tobacco. And yeah, so this idea of local knowledge versus it seems like local knowledge always bites the dust, and it's not always. That's not true, but so go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is the area that I've been thinking about. Partly sparked off by what you did the other day, which was to make, I think the word you used, translation or interpretation of a piece that came out into my blog.
Yeah, marvelous. It was marvelous.
So I'm just interested about this idea of translation, how you felt the process and the product. And so yeah, this was sparked my curiosity.
The idea, to me, interpretation and translation are words that are linked together, I think. I mean, that's kind of obvious, isn't it? You know, interpreters typically are folks who take one language and translate it into another language. My wife works at Mammoth Cave National Park, and I've worked in caves around here. I've been a cave guide at several different caves. And people call us interpreters, right? And what you're doing is you're taking someone into an unfamiliar environment, unknown environment, and you are acting as the go-between between that environment and whoever they are, and you're interpreting, like, they're under, not just the content, the knowledge of the caves, the stalactites and stalagmites, and the science of how all that stuff is formed and why there's so many caves in this part of Kentucky. And so there's a lot of content, but there's also, I went to a cave one time where they had, the cave was right in the middle of a town. It's a place called Horse Cave. And the cave was known to natives because it was a steady source of water. You could always get water in it. And but when the town was developed, it was developed because of the cave as a steady source of water. And culturally, it became important because it became the site of the first hydro plant in Kentucky. So, the cave was used as a electric plant, basically. And it was also used for tourists. And, so you've got the cultural side of that and the social side of that and the economic side, because the town grew from the cave itself. And when you're a guide in the cave, you're interpreting how the cave is situated in the life of the community. And the life of the community is long. It's geologic, and it's also local, right? So to me, interpreting and translating have been words that have different uses in different contexts. So a very specific use in cave guiding or any kind of guidebook that you do. And of course that flies right over into teaching, right? For me, okay, here's a book. This book sucks right here. This book sucks in a lot of ways. But there's something in there. This guy named is Marzano. He's famous for coming up with best practice, which I despise. But he introduced me to the idea that maybe all the research that's ever been done in education indicates that summarizing is just a critically important tool. But it seems obvious, doesn't it? You summarize stuff in order to kind of internalize it. And it's got me, summarizing is really important to me as a teacher. You summarize research, you summarize ideas, you're having discussions, you ask people to summarize what they think about it. You ask people to summarize their lives. How does that relate to what we're talking about? And, that to me, summarizing is translating. That's the connection for me. And we do it all the time. Sometimes we do it text to text, and sometimes we do it text to orality, and sometimes we do it text to picture, and sometimes we do it text to video. And that's why I like tools that have, all of those elements. Like you can put text in it, you can put audio in it, you can put video in it. I love the whole idea of translating, and that's with that tool I use, Ziga. To me, that's all I'm doing. I'm just translating. And I love the idea of you taking something and moving it. I guess that's what translation means. It's moving it from one place to another. It's kind of like a metaphor. It's carrying it over. To me, translating and interpreting are probably the most important things I do in my life. Although I don't think about it in those terms that often. I don't think in those abstract ways all that often. But, when I'm a farmer, I'm translating my knowledge about grass into knowing whether do I need to move the sheep today or not. And in teaching, I use it as a way to present information to people. How do I translate the idea of analysis to a group of college freshmen who, they don't really know about intellectual tools, right? How do I do that? And how do I translate the experience of a cave to somebody who just thinks of it as a hole in the ground, right? So I think it's at the core of a lot of what I do, or how I think of the world is translating. And I actually used a different word in the post that post you're talking about, and it's probably a stupid word, but I called it transrelating instead of just translating, just because that's really what I'm doing. And oftentimes that translation is between people, and that's the best one of all, I think.
Terry, your mic is we're getting.
Okay,
that's better. There's something that struck me very much is the connection between, or the parallel, or the I don't know what the word is, the coming together of your story of the sheep and the story of translating, and your students. Sorry, the word was summarizing.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, you were talking about sheep that were going to a place where they found the grass which they liked,
Mm-hmm.
maybe teenage grass.
Yeah.
And they would take time ruminating,
mm-hmm.
and thinking, and the thinking I was thinking immediately was not just about something which is intellectual,
Yeah.
but I don't think anything ever is. But the thinking was also the business of the stomach thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and the body thinking, and placing oneself in a field at a particular moment in time, with the sun at a particular angle, with the wind at a particular place,
Mm-hmm.
with the partners being in a particular place, and being able to situate oneself within that field.
Yeah, with sheep, it's instinctual, as far as we understand that word. I'm a little leery of that. Maybe it is. A lot of that is instinctual with people too. Like students bring what they bring to the particular field that they're working in, right? We don't really know. That's one of the problems I have with teaching, is that we don't really know what they bring for the most part. We find out a lot of that in the course of the class. And I'm not sure I would know what to do with it if I knew it before the class started, right? I don't, I know enough about myself to know that I don't want to take responsibility for that with them. That's who they are. And, yeah, the whole notion of digesting is interesting here. Ruminating as a form, digesting is a form of rumination, and how that's what we do. That's one of the things we do as humans that is so spectacular, is we can get past this instinctual kinds of rumination and get into something that is in our minds, mind ruminants. I guess that's what humans are, mind ruminants at our best, I think. Or maybe that's just the academic in me talking, or the person who values the mind, because everything's connected to the body and mind. Descartes, what an asshole. You're just damaging. I'm sure he never intended it. No more than Rousseau's Natural Man ever intended to ruin that idea either. So we take, that's what education does. It takes an idea that's great and just runs it into the ground and ruins it. I'm sorry, that was just a little mini rant there. But this idea of mind, we ruminate, and like you say, it's a whole field. That's why I love that word Feldgang. It's just because, it takes an abstract idea, and it says, you can use this in agriculture, and you can use this in walking around through nature. You can use this in your classroom, and that's usually a sign of a pretty good intellectual analytical tool, and even a way of living in the world. Philosophy is let's turn the rocks over and see what's underneath, and be amazed. And maybe some of it we understand, but most of it is kind of goes over our heads, like it makes us humble, like we ought to be, right? And so a sheep in a field, understands itself in that field, understands the hedgerows, and understands it can't. It's really funny. In one of the consequences of having the sheep in our fields all these years is that uh, we've invented a word here. It's called the eat line, EATLINE. And what that is that uh, sheep are not, they're not like goats. They will reach up, but goats will actually get up on trees, and they'll try to, as far as they can get up pretty high. They can be pretty damaging. Sheep, they kind of try to get up, but their necks don't move very much back. And so what happens is that on the edge of the tree line is the line that they've eaten up to, leaves, bark, whatever they can get. And it's this it's this beautiful average that runs across the inside of a field, into the hedgerows of the field. So you got trees in the hedgerow, and you got this eat line that's out a little bit of ways from it. So you've always got a place for the sheep where they can get out of the sun. But it's the height of the sheep, and it's aggravating because you can get smacked in the face with branches when you're moving the fence around. But it's something they've made legible in the field as a consequence of your having done something else. So, I mean, it's a beautiful thing to see, and I smile every time I see it and think about it, because I didn't make it. It's just an indirect consequence of something I did in the field. It's sort of like what happens in the classroom. Something amazing will happen, and I'll realize, I don't really know how much credit I can take for that, considering. You can lay out the conditions.
That word is very key.
Say again.
That word you just brought is very, very. How much credit can I take?
Yeah, right. It's like Shakespeare. He loved using terms of commerce in his writing. Credit. We use it all the time in school. We commercialize, and it's so common that we don't catch it. The metaphor of commerce has just so imbued education, that we don't see it. And that's what I like about I don't think I could be the teacher I am, and I'm not bragging or anything. I don't think I could be the teacher I am, though, without having had experiences well outside of teaching, with farming, having my own business, and I'm sure, you have the same sort of experience that I do. You bring stuff to teaching, and then you look at what the people are who have always been in teaching, what, the blind spots they have are just extraordinary. My own blind spots are extraordinary, but people who go to school, they become teachers and teach all their lives. Oh my God. It just amazes me, the blind spots that are there. And exposing those is hard. It's hard to see your own blind spots. Just really tough.
That's what you said about eat lines.
Yeah.
And legibility.
Mm-hmm.
Because the legible is very much a question of translation to people who share the same ability to understand what is being made legible for them.
Yes. Right. But you always go ahead.
Then there is this business of commerce, and I just this is immediately sending bells ringing. This is why I'm interrupting. Research and industry and productivity and commerce and legibility
absolutely
doesn't actually take into account, firstly, the relationship between, if I take you and the sheep, which is a pretty good relationship to think about teaching as.
Yeah.
And what you're being asked to read and what you're being asked to write to make the sheep legible to others.
Yeah.
because you can talk about the sheep in the field, which is theirs to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Until they get fed up with the with the grass and they want to go through the fence and find the grass somewhere else, in which case you have to put the fence back up again.
Yep.
Which has something to say about that. So I've got about what 20 minutes. So the questions I'm working on at the moment, which I'm sure you knowing me over the years, you will understand. My question is the following: is how do I respect the poem, the poetry, nature, when taking the risk to translate that into a different field, which is one of commerce? So if I take your example of translation from my ramble to something else, there is a relationship of trust and a relationship of extending something on the similar sort of working. That's to say that it's felt. What concerns me is when it's taken into a context which is academic, where you reduce the felt, and what you have is it's like taking your sheep to market.
Yep. Yeah.
Or taking your life to market, or
yes. No, it's selling part of yourself. Yeah.
And one of the things which you will understand is that I would only go to market when I was ready to be able to defend myself in the market. But if I was going to market, it was only a question of being able to be true to the nature which brought me there. And also finding ways to knock out the fence so that the sheep can go and eat somewhere else, but also in the sense that it's being responsible for the fence as well.
Yes.
As a parent, or as a teacher, or as an elder.
You know, to me, all right, here's one response to that question. Just every time I take sheep to market, when I've taken them in and I'm done and I'm driving away, I always have to stop and cry. And I think that's part of the translation, is that, there's Caesar and there's God. And you're rendering unto two different worlds, and those two worlds are not compatible. It's almost like you have to keep them separate, and then there are moments where you relating between them, and they always hurt. There's always friction because the values are completely different. And I think we spend a lot of time in education trying to avoid pain and suffering, and I just, that's, you don't want to cause suffering. I think there's a little bit of the Hippocratic oath that there's a lot that applies in teaching, but we have to acknowledge it, is that's part of the energy. And that sounds really abstract, but it's not, because like I just said, it's, when you drive away, you feel you've lost something in that stockyards. You've lost something terrible. And so what can you do? about that. Part of it's denial. You anesthetize yourself somehow, some way, a little bit, because you can't carry that around in you all the time. If you do, well, if you do it for a long enough period of time, it's ends up being in depression and anger in ways that are hard to describe, because it's happened to me. So I think that happens in teaching too. That's what I call teacher's remorse. This time of year, I just finished grading. Really, like meat. There's another classic example of two fields crossing each other, and the Venn diagram of that is pain. You teach students saying, "Why don't I?" And I'd make every effort to ameliorate this situation, even to the point of giving grades that are higher than they ought to be. And then somebody else comes down on my case. It's part of that system that says, "Hey, you give them too high grade. There's no rigor in your classes." The only rigor we're talking about is people who are dead, rigor mortis. But so I really haven't come to terms with that completely, Simon. I don't think I can.
No.
Not in the world I live in. Now, there are lots of people who do think, they say they come to terms with it, but I don't believe them. I know. Is that what you're talking about? Is that crossing over from one to the other and the translating that must be done? And part of the translation is the coin of suffering that you have to pay.
But I think that I think that this maybe is the last sort of little subject, because maybe in about sort of 15 minutes I have to go to get
Okay.
GEM. So, yeah, in a digital connected world in which we are exchanging, we spoke a little with Kevin and Sarah a while ago this afternoon, about what it means, these connections. And I know this is something which for you is something which is a constant, this business of felt. And what is this relationship? Is it simply transactional? How many people can you give attention to?
Yeah.
How many people can you show some sort of respect when the system in itself is designed to monetize the sheep?
Us. Yeah, you're forced to talk about things like sociologists talk about with social capital, and then you're well on your way towards not only commercializing the felt. I mean, commercializing you're objectifying stuff, but you're also commercializing the felt, right? And attention being the coin of the realm, always. Is that just baked in to the DNA of the tools that we use? Is it part of the field?
Tobacco.
Yeah.
I remember many conversations with you about the life which was enabled by the tobacco trade. And our lives are enabled by the slave trade.
Yeah.
So, as you say, if you can't get beyond the hurt for the sheep that are being taken to slaughter, then you can't function.
No. And then sometimes you can't function. Sometimes that's the way it works.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest thing. We think we can make that work. We think we can make that work and gloss it over, paper it over. But, if we really are translating, at some point we have to acknowledge it. And, that kind of suffering is not, nobody wants to monetize that, right? Nobody wants to monetize that suffering. Unless it's like a private prison system or something like that. That's how you monetize suffering, right? You put people in jail and you get paid for it. That's the only thing I know of that is like that. No, it's the kind of thing that makes you look down at the ground and shuffle your feet a little bit and saying, well, let's go bowling. Fuck it, let's go bowling, dude. I mean, there are ways to deal with it, and really pretty intelligent ways. I mean, denial denial gets a bad rap. It's a way to suffer through, right? As long as you don't, turn that denial into a black hole of positivism, which I see all the time. I mean, the huckster positivism is just like it's like the trickster god, right? It is denial in its most potent and virulent form. And man, do we ever have it in the United States? I mean, it was beautifully described by Voltaire in Candide, and now we've got it here in this country. Just this has been a wonderful conversation, Simon. You asked such good questions, and I get to bloviate and make like I'm making sense. But in the end, it's fuck it, dude, let's go bowling, or fuck it, dude, let's go for a walk, or isn't that butterfly beautiful, or let me go scratch a sheep behind the ear. And inevitably, that is the only thing that helps me is to I guess ignore the feeling for a while.
It's the bonds.
Yeah.
Which make it worthwhile.
Yep, it is.
And it's the bonds which bind us, and it's the bonds which means that relationships that we have with people, if they're not felt, and you can't possibly, unless you're in a large crowd of people in Clermont-Ferrand celebrating another defeat, the rugby team got defeated again, or you're at a concert with some I don't know, some guy who moves you, or a Shakespeare theatre play. That's the only time where you can feel it really part of something bigger, and you feel that you're not you don't exist anymore. Then you're back home.
That reminds me of at every single online, every single class I teach, introduction to literature class I teach, there will come a point where there will be some student who will look at me with this quizzical look in their face, and they'll say, Mr. Elliott, why do we read so much stuff about death? And I look at him and say, don't you want to think about death? And I just leave it there, unless they want to talk. And oftentimes it's just they're so dumbstruck. They're young and thinking about death that's the last thing they want to do. And it's probably the first thing they should do every day they wake up. I might die today. Let's go. Let's live. Damn it. Maybe that's what she tells.
Can we stop it on that point?
Yep. Sounds like a winner. Yep.
Okay.
Well, let me know how this.
Stop the broadcast.
Yes.